The outpost on Titan Station floated quietly above the pale surface of Saturn's largest moon. It was supposed to be a calm place where engineers and miners worked together, far away from the busy worlds of the galaxy. People came here for peace, for the steady hum of machines and the soft glow of reactor lights. Life was simple, until the day everything changed. Eli Tanner worked as a mechanic on that lonely station. He was not a hero or a soldier. He was just a man who fixed things that broke. Every morning he would drink his coffee while reading repair logs, then spend his hours crawling through tunnels, tightening bolts, and arguing with stubborn machines. He loved the quiet rhythm of his work. The smell of metal, the click of a wrench, it was his kind of music. Titan Station was old. Most of its systems had been patched together from older ships and leftover parts. There were leaks in the pipes, half-working sensors, and power lines that flickered like candlelight. But Eli made it work. Whenever the reactor groaned or the lights dimmed, he was there with his trusty wrench and a calm look on his face. "She's an old girl," he would say, tapping the wall gently. "Just needs a little patience." The other workers respected him. He rarely spoke much, but when he did, people listened. There was something steady about Eli, something that made others feel safe. Even when alarms blared or oxygen levels dipped, he never panicked. He'd sigh, grab his toolkit, and fix the problem. To most people, that made him just another worker. But soon, that calm strength would be tested in a way no one could imagine. It was early morning when the first alarm sounded. Eli was checking a broken coolant pump near the reactor. When the lights turned red, the deep siren echoed through the metal corridors, shaking dust from the vents. At first, he thought it was another system error. It happened all the time. He pressed his comm button and asked the control room, "Hey, you got another false alarm up there?" But no one answered. The line was dead. He frowned and tapped the side of his headset. Still nothing. Then the intercom crackled with static before a terrified voice broke through. "This is Control." Unknown ships approaching fast. Possible hostile contact. The voice cut off. Eli stood still for a moment, the hum of the reactor behind him. The outpost had no military defense. It wasn't built for battle. Only scientists, miners, and a few engineers lived here. The biggest weapon on the station was a fire extinguisher. He took a deep breath, wiped his hands on his work shirt, and started walking toward the central corridor. All around him, people were running, some carrying data drives, others searching for escape pods. Fear filled the air. "It's the Empire," someone shouted. "They found us." Eli didn't know much about the Galactic Empire except what he'd seen on news reports. They were powerful, strict, and proud of their armies. But why would they come all the way to Titan? There was nothing here worth conquering except a few mining drones and half-working reactors. He reached the control deck and saw chaos. The command officers were trying to send a distress call, but the communication system was offline. One of the younger technicians shouted, "All frequencies jammed." Another was frantically pressing buttons. "Backup power," Eli asked. "Down," someone yelled. "The relay burned out." Eli moved to the panel without waiting for permission. His fingers worked fast as he checked the circuits. He noticed a small green light blinking under the board. That meant the manual link still worked, but only barely. "Give me 10 minutes, he said quietly. But before he could finish, the entire station shook. A deep rumble traveled through the walls. Dust fell from the ceiling. Through the viewport, bright flashes of light could be seen in the distance, ships entering orbit. The Empire had arrived. Everyone panicked. Officers shouted orders, people ran toward the emergency shelters, and the power flickered again. Eli held onto the panel, watching the monitors go dark one by one. He didn't run. Instead, he whispered to himself, "Figures. Everything breaks the day after I fix it." The emergency lights kicked in, bathing the hallway in a red glow. The station now looked like a heartbeat in the dark. Eli walked back toward the reactor, his wrench clutched tight in one hand. He knew that without power, the air systems would fail within hours. He couldn't save the whole outpost, but he could keep it breathing a little longer. He entered the maintenance bay and started the manual startup. The old reactor hummed, its blue light slowly returning. The familiar vibration under his boots gave him courage. "That's it, girl," he said softly. "Stay with me." As he worked, his mind drifted to home, Earth far away. He had left years ago to escape noise and politics, to live a quiet life fixing machines. Now that quiet was gone. He wondered if anyone out there would even know what was happening on Titan. A few minutes later, the intercom came back on, weak and full of static. A frightened voice spoke, "All personnel, prepare for impact. The Empire has landed soldiers. Evacuate immediately." Eli stopped working and looked around the small bay. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed faintly through the corridors above. He could imagine them, armored troops walking in perfect rhythm, scanning every room. They would take control of the outpost easily. No one here could fight them. He checked his tools, a wrench, a power torch, a cable cutter. None of them were weapons, yet he held the wrench a little tighter. He wasn't angry, not yet, but something inside him stirred, a quiet frustration at how fragile everything seemed. He went to the wall and opened a small service panel. Inside were manual controls for doors, airlocks, and vents, old systems that the Empire's advanced technology might overlook. If they shut down the main grid, these old controls might still work. He began making notes in his small pocket pad. Manual link between sectors A and C. Hidden conduit under Deck 3. Possible loop through oxygen vents. He didn't have a plan yet, but years of repairing machines had taught him one thing. Every system, no matter how advanced, could break. And if he couldn't fight the Empire's soldiers, maybe he could fight their machines. For now, though, his job was simple: keep the outpost alive. When the lights dimmed again, Eli turned on his small handheld lamp. The glow reflected off his tired face and the metallic walls. The sound of the reactor throbbed like a heartbeat in the background. He sat for a moment, catching his breath. Around him, the station creaked, and the cold wind from outside seeped through the vents. It was the sound of a dying machine. But Eli didn't give up easily. He muttered to himself, "You can fix this." "You always do," then tightening his gloves, he stood up and went back to work, alone in the red light, surrounded by the distant thunder of enemy ships landing on the moon's surface. Somewhere far above, the Empire's commander reported, "The outpost appears unarmed. Expect no resistance." But down below, in the flickering corridors of Titan Station, a single mechanic was already preparing his tools. He didn't have armor or weapons, but he had something far more dangerous, a stubborn will and a wrench that had never failed him. And though no one knew it yet, that was going to change the course of the entire battle. Part 2. The Arrival of the Empire. The sound of engines filled the sky above Titan Station. The Empire's ships came down like silver arrows cutting through the mist. Their lights glowed in patterns across the frozen surface of the moon. Inside the outpost, the ground shook again and again as landing crafts touched down. The walls rattled and the air ducts groaned from the vibrations. Eli Tanner was still in the maintenance bay, sitting by the reactor panel. He could feel the tremors under his boots. He knew what that meant. The Empire had arrived. For a few seconds, he closed his eyes and listened. The station's machines were struggling, trying to keep up. The power levels were unstable, but he managed to keep them running. The emergency network was still online, and that gave him a small advantage. He checked the screens, oxygen, gravity, lights, all still holding. "Good girl," he whispered to the station again. He had a habit of talking to machines as if they were alive. It made him feel less alone. Over the radio, scattered voices could be heard. "They're inside the hangar," one person shouted. Another cried, "All decks, seal the doors." But Eli knew those commands wouldn't help. The Empire had better systems, stronger tools, and trained people. They were not afraid of broken airlocks or flickering corridors. He looked at his reflection in the metal panel. He didn't look like a soldier. His dark hair was messy, his work shirt stained with grease. His face showed years of fatigue and quiet patience. Yet behind those tired eyes there was a spark, a stubborn refusal to give up. He took his wrench, the same tool he used every day, and put it through the loop of his belt. It felt heavy, not because of its weight, but because of what it meant now. It wasn't just a tool anymore. It was his symbol of control in a world that was losing it. Eli walked down the corridor toward the central control room. The lights flickered as the backup power kicked in. Steam hissed from the pipes and the smell of burnt metal filled the air. He could hear footsteps running somewhere above. Panic spread fast. When he reached the command deck, the doors were half open, damaged by a power surge. Inside, officers were arguing, their screens flashing red alerts. One of them turned and shouted, "We need to evacuate. The Empire will destroy this place." "Where's the nearest shuttle?" Eli asked calmly. They're already full, someone replied. The last one leaves in 10 minutes. Eli looked at the screen showing live feeds of the surface. The Empire's soldiers were walking toward the outpost. They moved in perfect lines, shining armor reflecting the pale light of Saturn above. Their machines followed, hovering drones scanning the ground. Everything about them looked powerful, organized, and unstoppable. He could see that the outpost's defense systems were offline. The old weapons hadn't worked for years. He had once offered to repair them, but the budget never allowed it. Now looking at the screens, he thought quietly, if I can't fight them, maybe I can confuse them. He pulled a small terminal from the desk and connected it to his wrist device. What are you doing? A young technician asked, watching nervously. Keeping the lights on, Eli said simply. But that wasn't the full truth. He was doing something more. He was creating a network loop, rerouting the outpost system through old manual channels that the Empire's technology wouldn't recognize. It was risky, but he didn't care. If he could make their machines see false signals, he might slow them down. Minutes passed. The officers left the room one by one, heading for the escape shuttles. Eli stayed behind. The screens flickered again, showing static. Then, for a moment, the surface cameras went dark. When they came back, several drones were floating in the wrong directions. Eli smiled faintly. Guess you folks don't like human wiring. He kept working. Each command he entered made the outpost more unpredictable. He rerouted the power flow through the maintenance grid, something no one ever used except him. That grid ran manually. It didn't depend on fancy software or wireless controls. It depended on switches, levers, and direct connections. By the time the Empire's troops reached the main doors, the entire station had become a puzzle of lights and circuits. Hallways sealed on their own, airlocks cycled randomly, and control panels flickered with strange readings. From the outside, it must have looked like a ghost ship. Eli moved deeper into the lower decks where the air was cold and damp. This part of the station was his second home. He knew every wire, every loose bolt. He walked carefully, listening to the distant hum of the invading machines. Somewhere above, heavy boots echoed as soldiers moved through the corridors. He ducked into a side room, a small repair bay with old machinery. He turned off his lamp and sat quietly for a moment. He could hear faint mechanical sounds from the ceiling vents. The Empire's drones were scanning the area. He held his breath until the sound faded away. He began to think.
The Empire uses advanced systems, he told himself.
They rely on automation. They don't like doing things the hard way. That was where his strength lay, doing things manually. No matter how advanced their machines were, they couldn't think like a tired human with a stubborn mind. He went to an old console and opened a wiring panel. Inside were thick bundles of cables. He started connecting them by hand, creating loops that sent false signals across the station. If the Empire tried to take control of the power system, they would only get scrambled data. Every few minutes he stopped to listen. The sound of doors opening and closing echoed through the halls. He heard the faint metallic voices of the invaders giving orders. He didn't understand their language, but he could hear confusion in their tone. Some of their equipment was failing. Lights flickered, sensors went dark, and communication signals dropped. Eli allowed himself a small laugh. "Welcome to Titan Station," he whispered. The minutes turned into hours. The Empire expected to take the outpost in one quick operation, but instead they found themselves trapped in a maze of failing systems. Their own machines began to malfunction because of Eli's reroutes. The simplest errors caused their plans to break apart. He didn't rest. Sweat ran down his face as he worked in the dim light. His hands were dirty and his eyes burned from exhaustion, but he kept going. He had no plan to win a war. He just wanted to keep the station alive for one more hour, one more minute. In the Empire's command ship far above, their commander frowned at the reports. "Resistance?" he asked his officer. "Unknown interference," the officer replied. "Systems are failing. Local controls do not respond." "It's manual." "Manual?" The commander couldn't believe it. No one used manual systems anymore. It was primitive, yet somehow it was defeating their technology. Back on Titan, Eli adjusted another switch. The sound of hissing pipes surrounded him. The station felt alive again, breathing with him, fighting beside him. For the first time, he wasn't just fixing a machine, he was defending it. As he finished his last adjustment, he looked at his wrench. Its handle was worn and scratched, but strong. It had never let him down. He smiled faintly and whispered, "Let's see how long we can hold them, old friend." And with that, the mechanic who never wanted to be a hero became the one person standing between an empire and a broken, stubborn outpost still refusing to fall. The long hours passed slowly on Titan Station. The lights continued to flicker, sometimes turning the halls red, then dimming to a soft blue. The entire outpost felt alive, almost breathing in rhythm with the hum of the reactor. Deep inside, Eli Tanner kept working, one step ahead of the Empire's soldiers who were still trying to make sense of the strange place. The invaders had taken control of most other human outposts before. Those battles were quick, clean, and organized. But this time was different. Nothing on Titan Station behaved the way their systems expected. Doors locked without warning, lifts stopped halfway between decks, and ventilation shafts changed direction. Their scanners gave false readings, showing empty rooms that were full and full rooms that were empty. Eli was the reason behind all of it. He wasn't fighting them with weapons. He was fighting them with broken circuits, mismatched wires, and old code lines that only he understood. To him, every sound, every spark, every small vibration carried information. He knew when a relay failed or when a cable burned out. The whole station spoke to him like an old friend trying to hold on. He moved silently through the service tunnels, his lamp guiding the way. The air was cold and the metal walls echoed every step. He paused often to listen. Above him, the faint sound of boots clanged against the floors. The Empire's soldiers were searching carefully now, trying to find whoever was behind the chaos. Eli knew they were close, but he wasn't afraid. He had spent most of his life fixing things that seemed impossible to fix. Machines that others had given up on always worked again under his hands. "Everything can be repaired," he whispered to himself. "Even this mess." He stopped near an old power junction where hundreds of wires met like roots of a tree. It was one of the few places still untouched by the invaders. He sat down, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and looked at his wrench lying beside him. It was an old, heavy tool, its handle dented from years of use. To anyone else, it was just a piece of metal. But to Eli, it was a part of who he was. That wrench had seen every repair, every spark, every long night on this lonely outpost. He picked it up, holding it tightly for a moment. "Guess it's just you and me now," he said softly. Back in the upper decks, the Empire's commander grew restless. Their equipment logs were filled with errors, their communication channels scrambled. "Find the source of this interference," the commander ordered. "Someone on this station is causing it." The soldiers spread out, moving carefully through the maze-like corridors. But the outpost seemed to resist them. One door would open smoothly while another slammed shut. Some rooms were filled with heavy mist from cooling pipes, making it hard to see. Others were silent except for the faint clicking of the power relays Eli had rewired. Eli watched them through the security monitors he had reconnected. The screens showed groups of soldiers moving in circles, lost and confused. He couldn't help but smile a little. "You can have your fancy suits and your shiny armor," he muttered. "But you don't know this place like I do." He typed a few commands into the old control terminal, sending a false message to their network. It was a simple system error notice. "Foreign operator detected. System lockdown in progress." He laughed quietly as he imagined their reaction. Still, he knew he couldn't keep this up forever. The Empire had resources and patience. Eventually, they would figure out his tricks. He had to find a way to stop them completely, or at least buy enough time for a rescue team to arrive. He looked at the reactor readouts on his wrist device. The energy levels were dropping fast. The station's power cells were nearly empty. If the lights went out, everything he had done would stop working. The Empire's soldiers would gain control easily. He leaned back and thought hard. "If I can't outpower them," he thought, "I'll have to outsmart them." Then he remembered something. Months ago, he had repaired an old gravity stabilizer on the lower deck. It was built before the Empire even existed, an ancient design that still ran on analog controls. If he could connect it to the main grid, he might overload the Empire's equipment temporarily without hurting anyone. Their suits and drones were too dependent on field stabilizers. A strong pulse from an old system could make their gear useless for a short time. It was risky, but Eli was used to taking risks when it came to repairs. He stood up, stretched his tired arms, and started moving again. The lower deck was dark and quiet. Only the steady hum of the reactor filled the silence. As he entered the stabilizer chamber, he felt a wave of cold air. The big round machine stood in the center like a sleeping giant. Dust covered its panels and the lights on its side flickered weakly. Eli opened the control hatch and started working. His hands moved quickly, unscrewing bolts, tightening wires, checking power flow. He knew every sound by heart, the click of switches, the soft buzz of current. After half an hour, the stabilizer came to life with a low rumble. "Good," he whispered. "Now let's give them a surprise." He connected the stabilizer to the grid using his wrist terminal. On the screens above, he saw signals spike across the network. The Empire's scanners began to flash warnings. Their systems didn't understand what was happening. Eli adjusted the dials, fine-tuning the power output. Then, as the energy pulse spread through the outpost, lights across the station blinked. For a few seconds, the Empire's communication systems went silent. Their drones froze midair, their lights dimming. The soldiers' helmets flickered as their displays went dark. Confusion spread through their ranks. Eli watched the monitors and saw them stop moving. "That's right," he said softly. "Now you know how it feels when machines stop listening." He didn't celebrate. He knew it was only temporary. The Empire's equipment would recover soon, but this small pause gave him time to plan the next step. He had learned one thing through all this. Sometimes chaos was the best defense. He sat back in his chair and took a long breath. His hands were shaking slightly, but his eyes were calm. He looked around the dimly lit room and smiled at the mess of tools and wires. "You did good, old girl," he said to the station again. "We're still standing." For a brief moment, everything was quiet. The hum of machines sounded almost peaceful, but he knew the calm wouldn't last. The Empire's soldiers would recover, angrier and more determined. They would come again. Eli wiped the sweat from his forehead, tightened his gloves, and whispered to himself, "All right. Round 2. The angry mechanic wasn't angry because of hate or pride. He was angry because people treated machines like tools and stations like lifeless metal. To him, Titan Station was more than that. It was his home, his friend, the one thing that had always stayed when everything else left. And he wasn't about to let anyone take it from him. The Empire's ship still floated above Titan's pale sky, but their control over the outpost was slipping fast. The soldiers on the ground moved slower now, their equipment recovering from the strange power surge Eli Tanner had sent through the station. Their leader was angry, demanding reports from his units. But none of them had answers. The systems kept failing and no one could explain why. Inside the station, Eli sat beside the old gravity stabilizer, watching the readings slowly return to normal. His plan had worked, at least for now. The soldiers' machines had gone quiet for several minutes. It gave him a small window to breathe, to think. His hands were shaking from exhaustion, but his mind was sharp. He looked at the reactor output chart on his wrist terminal. Power levels were steady, but not for long. The station's batteries were old, and they wouldn't last another full cycle. He needed to find a way to keep the systems alive before everything went dark. He stood up, grabbed his wrench, and began walking toward the reactor bay. The corridors around him were dimly lit, the lights flickering in tired rhythm. The air was heavy, filled with the faint hum of life support fans. He passed by rooms that once held his co-workers, now empty and silent. The station felt like a ghost ship, but he still talked to it softly as if it could hear him. "Don't give up now," he whispered. "We've come too far." When he reached the reactor room, the heat from the core warmed his face. The blue light from the plasma coils reflected off his grease-stained shirt. He placed his hand on the metal railing, feeling the vibration of energy. It was alive, still fighting. He checked the status board and frowned. The stabilizer surge had drained the auxiliary grid faster than expected. That meant the outer decks were losing air pressure. If the Empire's soldiers stayed there too long, their sensors would warn them something was wrong. They'd figure out where the interference came from and find him. He moved quickly, opening the maintenance panel and adjusting the power routes. The station's systems were old and stubborn, but Eli knew their secrets. He found a way to reroute minimal power to the outer decks, just enough to keep them stable. It was risky, but it might delay discovery. As he worked, his comm link suddenly crackled. He froze, thinking the signal was dead long ago. Then a faint voice came through the static. "Titan Station, this is Rescue Shuttle 9. We received a distress ping. Is anyone alive down there?" Eli's heart skipped. He hadn't expected anyone to come. He grabbed the microphone and replied quickly. "This is Eli Tanner, Chief Mechanic. I'm here. The Empire's still on site. Systems are damaged, but I'm holding them off. The voice on the other end paused, then answered, Holding them off? How? Eli looked around at the flickering lights and crooked wires and smiled tiredly. With a wrench and bad luck. There was a short laugh through the comm, but then the tone turned serious. We can't land while their ships are still active. Can you disable their control signal from the ground? Eli looked at the data on his screen. The Empire's control signal was strong, beaming from the command relay they had planted outside the station. He couldn't reach it physically, but maybe, just maybe, he could reach it through the power grid. I might have an idea, he said. Give me 30 minutes. He cut the connection and ran his hand through his hair. 30 minutes, huh? He muttered. You really like challenges, don't you, Eli? He opened a map of the power network on his screen. If he overloaded the signal relay line using the reactor's secondary discharge, he could send a burst that jammed their frequency without causing harm. But it would require timing and a lot of luck. He started preparing. The first step was rerouting the backup capacitor banks. The panels resisted his commands, but he overrode them manually, typing in old engineer codes. Sparks flew from the circuits as he locked the last connection. Sorry, old girl, he whispered to the reactor. This might sting a little. He moved to the main control seat and began the sequence. Outside, through the small observation window, the Empire's command ship still hovered, bright and cold like a silent judge. He could almost feel its presence watching him. The system countdown started. 30 seconds to overload. Eli double-checked the safety locks, making sure no damage would reach the reactor. Sweat ran down his forehead. The station's hum grew louder as power built up. Seconds. Lights across the room flickered. The air grew thick with heat. Seconds. He tightened his grip on the lever, his wrench hanging by his side. He could hear his heartbeat louder than the hum of the reactor. 2. 1. He pulled the lever. A wave of static energy rushed through the station. The lights flashed white for a brief moment, then dimmed. The control board showed a signal spike, exactly what he wanted. The pulse traveled through the relay grid and hit the Empire's command frequency. In space above Titan, the Empire's ship flickered. The commander shouted orders, but their control links went silent again. Their drones froze mid-flight, their communication lines jammed by the overload. For several minutes, the fleet hung motionless, caught in confusion. Eli watched his monitor as the readings settled. The overload had worked. He exhaled deeply, his shoulders dropping with relief. You did it, he whispered. You actually did it? He sat down slowly, feeling the weight of exhaustion in his bones. His hands were trembling, his vision blurry, but he smiled anyway. Outside, through the station windows, he could see the distant glow of the rescue shuttle approaching the edge of Titan's orbit. Hope flickered like a new light. Then a sudden beep from the console made him look up. The system showed a new signal, the Empire's command ship trying to reboot its systems. The effect wouldn't last long. Eli stood again, gripping his wrench tightly. He knew the soldiers would soon regain control and head his way. But something had changed now. He wasn't just fixing a station anymore. He was protecting every person who had worked there. Every engineer who believed that skill and courage could still make a difference. He looked at his reflection in the glass. Tired eyes, messy hair, a dirty uniform, and a wrench that had seen better days. But there was pride there too. Quiet, humble pride, he whispered to himself. They sent warriors. We sent workers. Let's see which lasts longer. In the silence that followed, the soft hum of the reactor sounded almost like applause. Titan Station had become more than just metal and wires. It had become a symbol of what humans could do when pushed to the edge. Eli returned to the control board one last time and began redirecting power to the station's beacon. He wanted to make sure the rescue team could lock on before the Empire recovered. His fingers moved slowly now, every motion careful and precise. As the beacon flared to life, a soft golden light filled the room. For the first time since the invasion began, the outpost looked peaceful. The rescue pilot's voice came through the comm again, clearer this time. Titan Station, we see your signal. We're coming in, Eli smiled faintly and whispered. Welcome back. Then he looked around at the flickering panels, the humming reactor, and the shining wrench at his side. He had started the day as a tired mechanic just trying to do his job. But now, standing there in the dim glow of the control room, he realized something bigger. Sometimes you don't need to be a soldier to defend what matters. You just need to refuse to give up. And that refusal, more than any weapon, was what kept Titan Station standing. The light of Saturn shone softly over the frozen surface of Titan as the storm began to fade. The silence that followed was deep and calm, almost peaceful. Inside the outpost, the hum of machines slowly steadied again. The red warning lights that had glowed for hours now flickered into gentle white. For the first time in days, the station felt alive, not in fear but in quiet survival. Eli Tanner sat near the main control panel, breathing slowly. His hands were covered in oil, his clothes torn in places, but his eyes were bright with tired satisfaction. The wrench lay across his knees, scratched and heavy, but it had become something more than a tool. It was a symbol of his stubborn fight to keep the station running when everything else had fallen apart. He looked out through the small viewport at the stars beyond the thick glass. The Empire's ships were pulling away now, their engines glowing faintly in the distance. They had finally given up trying to control Titan Station. Their systems were too damaged, their signals too confused. What they had expected to be a quick conquest had turned into an embarrassing defeat. Eli smiled weakly. "Guess you weren't ready for a man with a wrench," he murmured. His comm device beeped softly. It was the rescue team's voice again, clearer this time. "Titan Station, this is Shuttle 9. We're approaching the dock. Are you ready for pickup?" He pressed the button. "Copy that," he said. His voice was hoarse but steady. "Docking Bay 3 is clear. Bring her in slow. She's had a rough day." The pilot laughed gently through the channel. "Understood, mechanic. You've done one amazing job down there. Command already heard the story. You've become a bit of a legend." Eli chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I'm no legend. I just didn't want the lights to go out." The sound of the shuttle engines echoed faintly through the metal walls. He stood up slowly, his legs weak from exhaustion, and made his way toward the docking bay. The corridor lights guided him like a soft golden path. As he walked, he passed the panels he had repaired, the wires he had twisted by hand, the old doors that had protected him when everything else failed. Every part of the station carried his mark now. When he reached the bay doors, he waited as the rescue shuttle gently connected to the dock. The hiss of air filled the chamber, and the door opened with a mechanical sigh. Two rescue officers stepped inside, their suits shining under the dim light. One of them removed her helmet and smiled warmly. "You must be Eli Tanner," she said. "You just saved an entire station by yourself." Eli gave a small, tired nod. "I just did what I always do, fix what's broken." The woman looked around, impressed. "Well, you fixed more than machines this time. You gave everyone out there hope." Eli looked down at his wrench, turning it slowly in his hands. "Funny," he said quietly. "This old thing has seen more trouble than any soldier's weapon." The officers helped him into the shuttle. As it lifted off, Eli watched through the window as Titan Station slowly faded into the distance. It was quiet now, its light steady, floating like a small star against the darkness. He felt a mix of sadness and pride. It had been his home for years, a place of hard work and quiet days. Now it stood as proof that even one person could make a difference. When the shuttle reached orbit, the pilot turned around and said, "Command wants to talk to you once we reach base. They're calling you the man who stopped the Empire with a wrench." Eli laughed softly. "That's going to sound like a bad joke in a history book." The pilot smiled. "Maybe, but it's a good one." He leaned back in his seat, finally allowing himself to relax. His eyes grew heavy, and for the first time in days he felt safe enough to close them. As he drifted into sleep, he could still feel the soft vibration of the engines, the sound of machines working smoothly again. That sound comforted him more than any song ever could. Hours later, when the shuttle landed on the main human colony base, Eli stepped out into the sunlight. It felt strange after so long under artificial light. The air was warmer, cleaner, and filled with distant sounds of people talking and laughing. Soldiers, engineers, and officials gathered around to see him. Cameras hovered above, recording his arrival. Someone handed him a cup of water. Another offered to carry his tools, but he held onto his wrench firmly. "She stays with me," he said with a faint smile. Reporters shouted questions and officers shook his hand. They called him Hero of Titan, the mechanic defender, and the man with the wrench. Eli didn't know what to say to any of that. He wasn't used to attention. To him, he had only done what needed to be done. When one young cadet asked, "Sir, how did you defeat them? You didn't even have weapons." Eli smiled gently and replied, You don't need weapons when you understand how things work. Machines, systems, even people, they all break if you push them the wrong way. You just have to know where to push. The crowd laughed softly, but there was truth in his words. His simple idea, fixing what others thought was hopeless, had become a lesson for everyone there. Weeks later, when he finally returned to work, he refused a promotion to officer rank. Instead, he chose to lead a team of engineers. He wanted to rebuild Titan Station properly this time, with better systems, stronger wiring, and safeguards that would prevent anyone from taking it again. His new team often teased him. "Boss," they'd say, "you really beat an empire with a wrench?" He would grin and answer, "No, I beat them with patience." As months passed, stories of Eli spread across the colonies. People began painting wrenches on their toolboxes, adding the words Tanner's Spirit under them. It became a quiet tradition among engineers, an unspoken reminder that no matter how powerful technology became, human courage and cleverness still mattered most. On Titan, the repaired station stood proudly once again. A small plaque was placed near the control room where Eli had fought his quiet battle. It read, "Here, one man proved that bravery is not always loud, and that even the smallest tool can hold the weight of an entire world." Years later, when Eli visited the outpost again, he stood before that plaque in silence. The lights above him glowed softly, and the station hummed like it always had. He placed his hand gently on the wall and whispered, "You're still running strong, old girl." Then he looked out through the window at the stars beyond, his wrench hanging from his belt, shining faintly under the light. He smiled. "They sent warriors," he said softly. "We sent workers, and we're still here." The hum of the station answered like a heartbeat, steady and alive, as the legend of the angry mechanic with a wrench lived on, not as a tale of war, but as a story of human will, kindness, and the quiet power of never giving up.